A little riled up the last couple of days about this BYU at number 9. Let's continue to have the national conversation from insiders and outlets as we have Chris Vannini of The Athletic now join us, college football senior writing. Chris, BYU at number 9, your initial thoughts. What did you think? Are they high enough?
Well, I'm just going to repeat what you guys have been saying and what everybody else has been saying who's, I think, been on the show, and that I think it's too high. They should be lower. I have been saying this for weeks. I rank all 134 teams every Monday. I've had BYU higher than the polls for weeks. And I've been trying to say that they deserve more respect, that they have 2 really good wins, that they're undefeated, that these things have to matter. And yet you go down and you see number 9 there on the CFP rankings. And I know a lot of people would say, hey, they're the number 4 seed. What does it matter? What it matters is that if you're number 9 at this point, it's going to be really hard if you don't win the conference to get in as an at-large spot. And I think that's a problem. If BYU goes undefeated, loses to Iowa State or whoever in the Big 12 championship, I don't know if BYU is going to be in. And I don't think that's a good spot to be in. It's a spot I don't think they should be in. I have them ranked number 6. So, yeah, I'm going to kind of repeat, I think, what a lot of BYU fans are feeling right now.
Okay, so we heard the explanation from the committee. Why do you think then BYU landed at number 9?
Because I think you see like the Baylor game go not so great. You see some games that were not as dominant. And the committee is not ranking on resume, which is a weird thing to say, because ultimately they're supposed to come down with the best teams, not the most deserving teams. And in a way, you can kind of backwards explain it then at that point, like the Florida State, Alabama stuff last year. And ultimately you say, hey, BYU, I don't think they would beat this team or that team or that team. They don't take betting lines into account, but the fact that BYU is only a 4-point favorite against Utah this week tells you that there are certain people that don't quite believe in this team yet. And I think that's the situation as well. They don't jump off the page in any like really offensive or defensive stats. And that's something, I've done the mock committee. You can go through all the different numbers you see and all the things they show you. You can see where a team ranks in a lot of different things. And I'm guessing BYU doesn't rank very high in a lot of those spots compared to some of those other teams. And ultimately, while the resume looks good, they may not be best compared to some of the teams ahead of them.
So what are the metrics and whatnot that the committee are looking at exactly? Because in men's basketball, Tom Homo, the BYU athletic director, was on that committee for 3 or 4 years. We picked his brain about what exactly they look at. You can look at the team sheet. It's very transparent. What is it for the College Football Playoff Committee?
Well, there's not any 1, 2, or 3 things, and every committee member can kind of weigh whatever they want, but they've got things on there like your record versus teams with a winning record, your record versus top 25 teams, your record versus top 10 teams. One that's really interesting is relative offense and relative defense, meaning how well does BYU do against the team compared to other opponents against that team? And that's a spot where BYU may not be very good at. Are they beating teams more than other teams are beating that team? It's like kind of a 2-step process there. Strength of schedule is obviously a big one. And a big part of that as well is when you can compare team schedules, you can like put 2 to 4 teams side by side and you can compare their schedules and you can like check off something. So it puts the most difficult games to the easiest games. And the harder games, the better teams you play, there's like a green square. It's like a bright green. The worst teams are a red. And so you kind of can see, if you see a lot of green on a team, that's where strength of schedule comes into play. Not just the number, not just, hey, they're the 8th hardest schedule, they're the 30th hardest schedule. But when you visually see it the way that it sets up, I wrote this and I included a photo in a story I did for The Athletic on Tuesday, if people want to go look at it out. But I laid out how the process works and what they look at and what the metrics are. And there's no agreement. There's no everybody feels the same way about something. But ultimately, those are the things that they look at.
So you had mentioned that you think it's going to be hard. There are scenarios that you could see where it would be hard for BYU to have a loss and get an at-large. So you don't believe this, let's say the scenario plays out. Well, one of 2 scenarios. Obviously, if they have 1 loss and then they win the Big 12 title game, they're going to get the auto bid anyway. But if they run the table in the regular season and then lose in that title game, you don't believe that they would be able to get that auto bid?
I think they can. I think the odds are lower than they'd be if they were ranked higher, which is where I think they should be ranked. So it's not impossible, but it does make it a lot higher. It also depends what happens everywhere else. What happens with the SEC? Does the SEC continue to knock each other down? Does SMU drop a game somewhere, or does SMU beat Miami in the ACC championship game or something like that? There's the idea of, like, basketball has bid thieves, where someone who wouldn't have made it otherwise wins the conference championship. We may get to a spot there with the Big 12, with the ACC, depending on what happens with those other conferences. SMU's not in the field right now, but they could make the championship and beat Miami. They still got to win the rest of their games. Like, again, there's still several steps to go, but it's going to be hard being down at 9 right now without any real big wins to boost that resume further. They're going to have to hope teams ahead of them lose for BYU to move up, to give it a little bit more cushion. They can lose in the Big 12 championship game and still make it. It's just not looking great at this point.
You certainly hope for Tennessee to lose to Georgia probably, and for Indiana to lose to Ohio State. Can BYU get ahead there? But BYU has to avoid a loss. Yet they have Utah, you got Kansas at home. At Arizona State is an interesting game. Home to Houston, who's now had a couple of good wins, including a notable win over the weekend. So how are you feeling about BYU's opportunity to go 4-0 and finish the regular season undefeated?
Well, I mean, it's hard for anybody to kind of go undefeated. And for a BYU team that we knew coming in wasn't dominant, wasn't loaded with NFL players that they could roll their way through, every game is going to be a challenge. And we've seen that in some of these BYU games. Some of them that UCF, they've taken care of business in a way we didn't expect. Some of them were closer than we expected, like Baylor. Houston is a lot better now than they were at the beginning of the season. Kansas has a really bad record, but they keep losing by one score. They're in these games a lot. Arizona State's going to a bowl game. We'll see the status of the health of their quarterback, but it's a pretty solid team. So these are all games. I wouldn't say any of these are pushover games. Like, all of these games are going to be a battle. And so getting through that undefeated is going to be pretty tough, because the Big 12 is proving out to be a very deep conference, even if it's not as top heavy as the others.
Let's dive in a little bit to the BYU-Utah game coming up on Saturday. As you mentioned, BYU is a favorite, but maybe not by as much as people would think at 4 points. This is a game where I don't know if you can find anybody that would disagree that BYU is certainly the better team going into this game, but in these rivalry games, a lot of times it doesn't matter, and there are a lot of BYU fans that have PTSD for situations just like this, where you thought the game was going to go one way and it turned. What do you make of this matchup with BYU traveling to Salt Lake City?
Yeah, 4-point favorite BYU is. I would have expected more given the kind of mess of a situation Utah is in. But obviously the fans know the state of this rivalry over the last 15 years. It's been very one-sided toward Utah, even if a lot of those games were close. I think a big question here is obviously Utah's quarterback situation. Is it Wilson? Is it Rose? They benched Wilson against Houston. He's been banged up. They don't seem to say who's going to be the quarterback, so we'll see. That has been a very big problem for them. If they can't get anything out of the quarterback position, it's going to be a really uphill climb. But that defense plays really hard and plays really well, and it's on the road. So, like, those are the things you have to get through. I still like BYU in this game. I like them to cover the 4 points, but this is also a spot where there's a lot of times where the team that everybody thinks is disrespected by the CFP goes out and loses its next game. And kind of then the committee can go, see, we were right about this team. So I'm very curious to see how BYU responds to that ranking and how they come out in what obviously is going to be a really big game.
Chris, we appreciate the time. Everybody go check out his stuff on The Athletic. Thanks for joining the program.